Hey everyone, Andrew Chalman here with ADSR Sounds. In this week's Maschine tutorial, I'll be working on the Studio hardware, and I'll be talking about the step sequencer on the hardware. So let's go ahead and take a look at what I have set up before we actually get into it. On Group A, I have some drums, and on Group B, I have a muted guitar sound. So I'm going to work with my drum group first, and I'm going to go ahead and actually enter into the step mode and see what it does. So traditionally we're just used to playing the sounds with the pads. But when we go into step mode and then try to play these sounds, it's not quite the same. We actually have this sort of odd behavior with the pads. So let's go ahead and figure out what this is actually doing. When we first press a pad here, we can see a couple things happen. The pad stays lit, and we also see a note shows up in our pattern up top. So what this is actually doing is entering a note corresponding to whatever sound you have selected into your pattern at a specific place. Sounds pretty confusing, but let's go ahead and sort of figure out how to make use of this. So if I just play the pattern back right now, I can see that we have a snare playing at the beginning, and I also see this indicator pad moving across at a specified tempo. Now that tempo actually corresponds to a couple of things. First of all, it's locked into your project tempo, so if you increase the tempo, that pad is going to move across a little bit faster. It also corresponds to your step grid. If you're not familiar with what that step grid is, let's go ahead and just change it and show you what that does. So step grid is accessed by pressing the grid button down here, making sure we're on the step tab up at the top, and we can see here we have a lot of different options. So right now we're on a 16th note, but say I change this to a quarter note and exit, we can see that the pad, when we play it back, is going to move across quite a bit more slowly. So it's going to be locked in to whatever step size you have. Each pad is going to be a step size in your grid. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that note by pressing it so we have sort of a blank slate to work from, and I will show you how to actually create a pattern using this step sequencer. We sort of have an idea of what it does. We know that we can enter in notes at different places, but let's see how we can actually use it to make some music. So I'm going to go ahead and change my step grid to an 8th note. I don't want to be able to have enough sort of space for my pattern. It's going to sound a little bit weird if my drum group is locked into only quarter notes. So I want to have some 8th notes to give me some flexibility, and that's going to allow us to create the pattern that sounds pretty good. So I want to start with my kick drum. It's usually going to play on the first and the third bars, or the first and the third beats of the bar. So I'll select that kick drum just by pressing the select button and pressing the pad that corresponds to that kick drum, and I'll go ahead and enter in one right there and one right there and do that a couple times. So now let's just play this back and see how it sounds. So that's pretty basic, but we'll use it to sort of act as the skeleton. Now if we look up here in the right screen, we see that we have access to all of the different velocities of our notes. And so we can go ahead and change this by using this knob over here. We can change whatever velocity of the note we have selected. Now the nice thing is we can go ahead and change the note that we have selected using these arrows up at the top. So right now we see we have this last kick drum selected, but if we move it over one, we can change the velocity of this one. We can go back and change the velocity of any of those notes. Really easy to sort of go through those notes and edit them. We also see we have options to edit the position, the length, and the pitch of those notes as well. So lots of options there using those 4 knobs, and luckily we have some nice screens to sort of tell us what's going on. But let's get back to the pattern here. So we have 4 kick drums playing. Let's add a snare. So I'll go ahead and select, hold down that, and then go to the snare drum over here, and I will add some snares by pressing the pads on the grid. So pretty basic, but we're getting there. Let's go ahead and I'm going to remove those snares by pressing them and show you that we can use fixed velocity to sort of eliminate those velocity problems. And when we don't have this actually turned on, the velocity is going to be whatever velocity you hit the pad with. So if I press it pretty softly, it's going to give me a low velocity, but if I really hit it hard, it's going to enter in at a high velocity. And that's pretty nice to get you some flexibility, but for me, I find it's pretty useful just to go into fixed velocity and just to make sure everything is within the same ballpark rather than going through and editing all those like we did with the kick drums. But we have our kick and our snare. Let's go ahead and add some additional notes to fill this out. Now if you want to sort of make this a little bit more interesting, we can add some 16th notes rather than just having this all 8th notes. So I'll go ahead into the grid, go back and change it to a 16th note. let's select my kick drum here and add a little bit of an interesting addition here. Let's see. Now you can see that indicator pad actually disappears, and that's because the pads, there aren't enough pads to correspond to all of these spaces in the grid. So to do that, we have to use this knob here and scroll over, and we can add some additional notes. Scroll back to the beginning and see how it sounds. I think I will change this one here and maybe put it there or something. You can have a lot of fun with this. Now you can also see that my pattern is too long right now. I haven't actually created enough notes to fill in the pattern. So I could go ahead and keep adding those notes, or I can just hit the pattern button, drag this length down to 2 bars, and now I have a full pattern, and I'm ready to move on to my instruments. So if I want to add a guitar, we can do this in a similar manner. And I also just wanted to show you how we can use this pitch knob over here. So I'm going to change my grid. Let's do grid back to an 8th note here, and I'll just add in some 8th notes. That's a little bit loud, so I will start that over with a lower velocity. I could have just changed the sound volume, that might have been easier. And I'm going to change this pattern down to, let's see, 1 bar? Is that, yeah, 1 bar. I'll make this pattern just 1 bar long. And I'll go ahead and scroll through these notes and change the pitch. So just like we are familiar with, we can use the arrows to change the highlighted note, and we can use this pitch knob to change whatever note that we want. So maybe I'll bring this one down to like a G. So we can get some cool melodies just by adding in some 8th notes and going ahead and changing the pitches of those and just get some new ideas. Now, as you probably can see, step mode has its pros and its cons. One drawback for me personally is that it's really difficult to enter in complicated patterns. Anything beyond a basic drum loop or a basic melody is really going to take a lot of time, and I find it's much faster just to actually record those notes and then work with those after the fact. But a cool benefit that I've found is that it gives rise to ideas that I normally wouldn't come up with if I was just playing on the pads or on the keys. For instance, this melody here, I probably wouldn't come up with something that sounds like this if I was just playing on the keyboard. It's a little bit of an unusual workflow for me, which can translate into some cool ideas. So go ahead and see how step mode integrates into your workflow. Personally, I don't use it a ton, but when I do, it's really helpful for the things that I want to do with it. So I just wanted to show you what's possible from the studio hardware within that step mode. So as always, thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something useful. If you have any questions relating to this video, go ahead and leave them below, and I will get back to you as soon as possible.